I'm Bryn Donnelly. I am the founder of our program at Greater Good Charities that is called Rescue Rebuild. It is an animal shelter renovation program. We travel around the country and the world renovating animal shelters, and now also renovating domestic violence shelters and homeless shelters so that they can be pet friendly. I think that's about it, Katie. If we're ready to jump in, we can.
I say go for it. You got the lead. I will follow your lead today.
Excellent. All right. Well, I apologize in advance. We know that one of our colleagues, Phil Arco, is going to speak a little bit about the link. So Katie and I are going to be jumping back and forth between screens a tiny bit, and I do apologize for that. All right. Just wanted to give a little bit of a preview of what Greater Good Charities does, because we are an international organization. Our specialty is moving products, basically, that are donated to us around the world in times of disaster or need. We've been in the Ukraine since the onset of the war. We were in Turkey for the horrible earthquake, but we do lots and lots of other things. So should any of your organizations need assistance, don't hesitate to reach out. We are here. As I mentioned, I am the founder and the director of our Rescue Rebuild program. That is just a very silly slide of our tool trailer. To date, we have not built at a domestic violence shelter or a homeless shelter anywhere other than in the United States. We have done several animal shelter renovations and construction projects globally, but nothing in the DV world. So interesting, you know, that was a hint for any of you. I would certainly be interested in entertaining the notion. So keep that in mind. Katie, do you want to speak a little bit about what RedRover does?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. So RedRover is predominantly based in the United States. We do some work across the border up to our Canadian friends through our RedRover responders work and our RedRover readers work. Essentially, RedRover responders is what we call kind of like the Red Cross for animals. So we train volunteers on providing temporary emergency sheltering services for animals in natural disasters, cruelty situations, and they do get to do the very cool work of joining Bryn and the Rescue Rebuild team to actually create some of these pet-friendly spaces that Bryn's going to talk to you about today. We also have our RedRover Readers program, which is all about teaching kids about kindness, compassion, and empathy for animals and pets and animals and people, apologies, through children's books. And then, of course, we have our RedRover Relief program, which is where all of our domestic violence assistance work lies, and what brings me here with you all today.
Awesome. So we wanted to mention a little bit about our organizations, since I know you are trying to figure out solutions and ways to help domestic violence shelters within your country. And we always hear in the United States that, you know, they're obviously very concerned about security, but we do all of our work, our, as we call it, boots on the ground work with volunteers. And so just keep that in mind as you're developing your programs. Certainly don't be afraid to include volunteers. They can be your absolute best source of human resource. Okay, so as we mentioned during, you know, the introduction for both Katie and myself, we started a program called Don't Forget the Pets. When RedRover and Greater Good Charities, our two organizations, started partnering on our domestic violence work here in the United States, it's hard to say, but less than 6% of our domestic violence shelters were pet friendly. And so we took it on ourselves as our mission to really increase that number. And so what we were finding back in 2016 was that domestic violence shelters were very nervous about having pets and people housed together. And as we kept getting no to our request to help them become pet friendly, even by providing funding and doing the construction ourselves, we decided that we needed to offer support to try to show domestic violence shelters the importance of the link, the importance of keeping people and pets together for health reasons, for healing, for all of the many, many reasons that we interact with our pets and we are very bonded to our pets. And so we started the workshop with the idea that we needed to convince them to start these pet programs, and then realized very quickly that the main reason they were nervous about starting pet programs was basically a lot of the things that Laurentina mentioned. You know, you're worried about the process, you're worried about how this is going to look, how are you going to set it up, how are you going to fund it, sustain it, have appropriate protocols and processes in place to protect both the pets and the people. And so we really quickly realized that we needed to offer a training course or a training manual handbook on how to do this, to kind of demystify the process in general. And so we offer a one-day training workshop at this point. We also do them in person in the US, but our goal is to really give them concrete steps on how to move the process forward from just conceptualizing it through actually getting it done. And then, you know, really our huge goal is to make them feel more confident about doing that, and to provide that supportive community, because this is definitely not something that any organization can take on alone. You need help and support. So the human service people, we don't ever expect you to be experts in animal welfare, and the animal welfare people that want to get involved and help, we don't expect you to understand the human service aspect. So definitely need to set up that supportive community and foster collaboration. When we start our trainings with domestic violence shelters and service providers, we usually try to start with what we call the why. Why is it important to start these programs? What are the benefits to having them? Why would you undertake this process? And what we found is that, you know, when you look at the world of domestic violence, and you think about, you know, we call them barriers or hurdles to service here. I'm sure you have a similar term. But when you look at domestic violence victims and why they may not seek help, a lot of times what we find is that it's because of their pets. They don't want to leave them behind. And some of them don't want to even be separated from them. So when you look at housing pets, lots of shelters start with, you know, should we have a foster program? Should an animal welfare partner take the pets while the human is staying at a human service shelter? And just something to keep in mind, that there are a lot of people who, even with the pet in a safe place, they don't want to be parted from that pet. So definitely something to consider when you're setting up your program. Other things that we've heard from our partners in domestic violence are that, you know, maybe not all of your staff or your board of directors that we have at our shelters are on board with the process. They may be worried about the legality of it. They may be worried about the risk to children, the risk to other non-pet owners. And so, you know, there's a lot of buy-in, as we call it, that can be provided by showing them the simple facts of the statistics related to domestic violence and pets, the health benefits the health benefits with having pets and people stay together. And so we kind of walk people through that in our training handbook that you can find at our website. As far as stakeholder support, that's kind of that community collaboration piece. You know, we like to say you never know who your partners are going to be. So we'll talk a little bit about collaboration. You know, as you know, law enforcement plays a huge role. The veterinarians play a huge role. Animal welfare organizations do, but also just community people who are really, really invested in helping pets and people. So getting them that why information is also really, really important so they can help you out in any way possible. And then we'll talk a tiny bit about fundraising. You know, if you join us for one of our trainings, we have lots of international people who do. We can talk about that a little bit more. But the important thing to remember here is that pets don't take money away from your human service programs. You're opening up a new donor demographic. And so understanding the why and how you can really convey that information to potential fundraisers is super important as well. Katie, I'm going to stop sharing. Do you want to talk a little bit about the link a tiny bit more?
Sure, yeah, I can do that.
All right.
Just bear with me for 1 second while I get my screen set up.
So Phil, who was not able to join us today, actually runs in the US, the National Link Coalition. So we are going to give the very watered down version of that, but hopefully it will be informative.
Perfect. Can you see pets are part of the family, Bryn, on your end?
Sure can.
Awesome. So obviously these statistics are related to the US. And I know we have about 45 minutes left. And so I'm going to do a really, really quick overview of what we talk about in terms of the link between human and animal violence here in the US. So we know that about 70% of homes in the US, that's 90.5 million, have pets. And we know that about 70% of homes with kids under the age of 6 have at least one pet. So we know that there are a lot of US homes with people and kids. And we also know that 98% of pet owners in the US consider their pet to be an important part of their family. So we know that just there are people and pets together who make up that family unit. Unfortunately, we also know in the US that more than 10 million adults experience domestic violence in the US each year. So I am no math major. I had to take statistics, at least twice. But I can look at these numbers and I can easily figure out that with numbers this high, there is the likelihood that when domestic violence is happening in the home, there is also the potential that animal violence is going to happen in the home. Essentially, the link between human and animal violence means that when one of these things in the bubble is happening, one of the other things in the bubble is also likely to be happening as well. So the link really refers to child abuse, elder abuse, animal abuse, and domestic violence or intimate partner violence, which is often called here in the US as well. I think Phil really said it best when he said, when animals are abused, people are at risk. When people are abused, animals are at risk. And that is essentially what the link boils down to, is that when people and pets exist together, there is the potential for violence. Foundational research, as Bryn mentioned, really encourage you to check out the nationallinkcoalition.org. The website offers a ton of information on really that foundational piece of where this topic of pets and people together really came from. What I would like to focus on is a more recent report that came out of a domestic violence shelter here in New York City. They partnered with our National Domestic Violence Hotline. So that's the hotline that survivors can call, text, email, reach out to get services related to domestic violence. And in 2021, they surveyed about 2,500 survivors about their experience of domestic violence related to animal violence. And this is what survivors had to say. 48% were worried about threats of harm to their pets. 76% had actually already noticed changes in their pet's behavior due to the violence or the threat of violence. 37% were worried that the abuser was going to harm or kill a pet. And 29% had shared that the abuser had actually harmed or killed the pet already. In addition, 30% of survivors had witnessed or been aware of pet abuse, that children had witnessed or been aware of the pet abuse. And 91% say that their pets play a significant role in their ability to heal and survive. Finally, survivors shared that keeping their pet with them factored in their decision to seek shelter. So 97% of 2,500 people said, if I can't take my pet with me, I may not seek shelter. And I think one of the most important stats that we like to point out is that 72% of our survivors didn't even know that a pet housing program was a thing. They didn't even know it existed. And so one of the most important things that we share with our colleagues here in the US is if you do create a pet housing program, you've really got to talk about it. You've got to share it with your community, not only from a fundraising standpoint, like Bryn shared, because it is absolutely a fundraising tool for us here, but also because our survivors need to know that this type of programming exists. One of the reasons why I really like to call out this report is that the sample size was about 2,500 people. And it was really able to reach survivors who hadn't entered into shelter yet. Our foundational research is really, really important, that information that you'll get at the National Link Coalition. But the sample sizes were much smaller. It dates back to, I want to say, the early to mid 90s. So our sample sizes were much smaller, and those were folks who were in shelter. And so I love this report from the Urban Resource Institute, the PALS report, because I think it gives us a really holistic view of what it means to experience domestic violence and animal abuse. We are happy to share these slides with you all after the fact. I'm going to just click through so I can bring all of these up. Now, I'm not sure if this is something that you all in Portugal are really familiar with, but we utilize something here in the US called the power and control wheel. This dates back to the 1970s. There's been lots of iterations of it over the years as we've learned more about power and control within the dynamic of domestic violence. But this particular power and control wheel was adapted to show what animal violence might look like within this context. And so I'll just want to call out a couple of important ones for us here that we've seen. One is this idea of isolation. And so, we often see abusers refusing to allow a survivor to provide veterinary care, or maybe not even allowing the survivor to socialize with the pet. Could be just going out in public, could be taking the pet to the dog park, but really isolating that survivor and the pet from the outside world. We also see, in terms of legal abuse, often abusers will deny ownership of pets to survivors. So for us, this means that the survivor's name might not be on purchase or rescue paperwork. And this really plays into custody battles over pets here in the US. And finally, I just want to call out this economic abuse. So refusing to provide money, again, for that vet care, but maybe even pet food. This is these three are really important for us. We like to call out to our colleagues so that we can remove a little bit of judgment when we see survivors and their pets. If we have a survivor come into shelter and their pet maybe hasn't received the best veterinary care or the best grooming care, or maybe just isn't as well taken care of as maybe our own pets, we need to be really careful about that judgment piece and just remember that there may be something else at play here. This is also really important information that we share with our veterinary colleagues because they are going to see pets and survivors coming into their clinics. And so this is really important information for them to also help remove some of that judgment and perhaps provide some supportive resources to that survivor and pets and get them connected to services. I'm just going to flip through some of these and I'll just end on this note and then I'll pass it back to you, Bryn. I like to call it the light bulb moment. We have obviously a lot of people with animals. We have a lot of people with children and animals, and we have a lot of people who consider pets to be a member of the family. But we also still have a lot of people who haven't connected this idea of the link between human and animal violence. Bryn and I were just at a conference last week in Dallas, Texas, and I would guess, at least 50 conversations with people who said, I had no idea that there was such a link between human and animal violence. I had no idea that domestic violence survivors might not leave if they can't take their pet. And so I really just encourage you all to share this light bulb moment with others. Help others realize that this is, one, a thing, and that it is a reason why domestic violence survivors might not leave with their pets. Bren, anything else you wanted me to touch on related to the link? I know that was a quick overview. You're on mute.
Totally forgot, sorry. Laurentino, is that good, you think? We kind of...
Yes, very good. It's okay. It's a good introduction. Thank you so much.
No problem. All right, well, then I will go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so kind of in this overarching, the why, to wrap that up, we get a lot of feedback from the shelter partners that we work with. And one of them said that, do not be tempted to view this project as just something else on your to-do list. It's important and may make all the difference in a victim's decision to leave or stay. So super important. We're hearing from our partners all over the country that, when they do start it, even if they started from a place of being very nervous about it, it has made a huge difference in their programs, in their ability to help people, which is at the end of the day, why they are there. Excellent. And then kind of touching back on the link, people heal the pets and pets heal the people. And so one of our advocates said it's worth any work on the end of the shelter. And what we like to counsel is that even though, we all feel stressed, we all feel overworked, and how Katie and I really like to look at this starting pet programs process is that instead of saying extra work, it's really just different work. And why we say that is because you can actually put pets to work for your shelter. When you think about what we are trying to do in the world of domestic violence, which is get people from a very dangerous situation to a happier outcome, to whatever that looks like for them. And so when you think about how you can help facilitate that, you want to look at the human-animal bond and what pets really do for you. And so when you think about health benefits, there's so much great research out there that's available on the actual physical health benefits and the biochemistry of pets and people together. So when we think about cortisol levels, our stress hormone, and we think about, sometimes people coming into domestic violence shelters, especially the kids, and how shattered their empathy and trust is. Pets do so much to help rebuild those pathways. And so you can use pets to help have people talk through really what we say tough conversations. So whether it's re-experiencing some of the abuse that they had so they can be, getting on a path to healing, whether it's kids really telling, their story about what has happened. And so when counselors are trying to work with adults and kids, pets can really help facilitate that. In addition to that sense of responsibility, I always hesitate when I say that because it sounds judgy, and we don't want to be judgy. But what I mean by that is, when you come into shelter, sometimes you're just exhausted. That decompression of getting out of a stressful situation is very overwhelming sometimes. And so more along the lines of not responsibility, but getting on a path that is going to be, a happier outcome for that particular survivor. Pets can really help that because they're going to want to get their pet into permanent housing. They're going to want to kind of get their life to a happy place so that they can get their kids and their pets into a happier situation too. So that's all I mean by responsibility. But definitely when you think of what services we're providing, pets can definitely help make that process a little bit easier.
Hey, Bren, before you click over,
Yeah, sure.
Slow down just a tad.
Oh, no problem. Is that what's in the chat? I couldn't even open it up.
Yeah.
Good deal.
Yeah. Your New York is coming out.
Us East Coast Americans tend to talk really fast. I apologize. Thank you. One of the things that our shelter partners ask us is, is there a checklist? Is there a to-do list? where do we start to get our process going? And that's really hard, so while we don't advocate for having a checklist, these are kind of the buckets that we want your organizations to address. Start with finding your collaborators in the community and in your service space. And then as far as designing your space, that's kind of thinking about, okay, will we have pets on site at our domestic violence shelter? Will they be in room? Will they be in a separate building on our property? And then from there, how are we going to set up our structure, our processes, and our protocols and our day-to-day operation to ensure everybody's safety and successful outcome of this program? Then fundraising obviously is a huge part of it. And then Katie usually likes to talk about evaluation. What we mean by that is usually when we start these programs, you want to start small. You don't need to start with, the big, huge shelter where you're housing 25 pets or, whatever number you're imagining. Start small, test it out, evaluate what is working, what isn't working, whether that's with your survivors, whether it's with your staff. Just evaluate through asking your staff questions, asking your clients questions, but really, really look at how you can better serve your program, better serve your people by figuring out what's working and not working. And I'm doing crazy things. There we go. Collaboration. So collaboration is really key. When you think about who your partners are going to be, oh, wow. Well, that's out of place. So let's jump to the next one. Sorry about that. When you think about who your collaborators are going to be, immediately we think about the big three. So whether you're a domestic violence shelter or a veterinarian or an animal welfare organization, coming at this, you want to partner with the two other organizations in these bubbles. And so what we say there is that this is kind of your core. We don't expect everyone to be the expert in every area. So rely on the people who are the experts in that area to help you. When you really think about starting to include people outside of those three bubbles, law enforcement immediately comes to mind. One of the big things that we talk about during our training is the education piece. The conference that Katie just mentioned was a combined domestic violence law enforcement conversation. And both parties were very, very interested in their light bulb moment, so to speak. But when you think about the role law enforcement will play, it's really our job in animal welfare and in human services to help educate them on the link and on the services that you may be offering or thinking about offering and what role they can play in that. So when you think about pet resources, law enforcement, at least in the United States, their big fear is that when they pick up a survivor and that survivor has a pet and they don't want to leave because of that pet, the law enforcement officers don't want to pick up the pet at the same time if there is nowhere for them to take that pet. And so it's really, really critical in this collaborative step that you give them a place to go. And so if in your individual community, it's not the job of law enforcement to maybe pick up the survivor or pick up the pet, then definitely reach out to law enforcement because we all know the dangers. And so when you think about the danger of picking up a survivor by themselves, that just increases exponentially when you have to pick up a survivor and a pet. So I'm not sure what your system is in Portugal and around the rest of Europe, but definitely work with your law enforcement partners to make sure that whatever you're doing to get the people safe and the pet safe, that you're doing it with their help. Food banks. I don't know if you have food banks in Europe. I assume you do. It can't possibly be something we do alone, but when we say food bank, we mean different nonprofit organizations or government agencies that provide food for people in crisis, whether they're people experiencing homelessness or just food insecurity or socioeconomic insecurity that is leading to food insecurity. What we have found in the US is that if you are providing food to a human being who has a pet, and you are not also providing pet food, what often happens is the pet ends up receiving the human food. So definitely think about, your link, and think about, all your linkages. And in that collaboration piece, this is huge. So you want to make sure that if you're providing food outside of shelter, that you're doing so for the pet as well. And also giving them that light bulb moment Katie mentioned of making sure they know all of the linkage between pet abuse, human abuse, elder abuse, because lots of times they have eyes on what is going on in the human world more so than we even know. Schools and colleges. This kind of goes back to that volunteer piece. And so, put those kids to work for you. So whether it's the younger children, whether it's the university age kids, they love to give back as well. And they might not have money to give, but they have time. And so get them out there finding supplies for you, doing contests to get supplies for you, and also telling your story. They're a fabulous voice piece, and they're the new generation coming up. So put them to work for you in that advocacy role. All right, so Katie already mentioned the suspending judgment, because across all of those different groups of people, they don't maybe know the story of domestic violence and animal-related violence within that kind of linkage. And so when you're thinking about what is going on, make sure your partners are suspending judgment and looking at the picture from a much bigger view. Training is also super important. Whether you're the human service organization or the veterinary partner, you definitely need to be cross-training all the time. So work together, provide information for each other, and really, check in constantly. In the United States, we have a lot of employment turnover, we say. So jobs that are very stressful, working in human service shelters, working in animal shelters, working in law enforcement, these jobs tend to have employee burnout. And so you have constant changing of people in these positions. And so if you're not checking in with your partners frequently and providing consistent training frequently, lots of times you'll get a new person in your collaboration, and maybe they don't know what the collaboration is all about. Maybe they don't have all the education to effectively drive that collaboration. So check in, evaluate, consistent training. In the United States, we talk a lot about having MOUs, memorandums of understanding, we call them. But really, they're just partnership agreements. So instead of just, a handshake over lunch saying, yes, this animal welfare partner is going to work with this human service shelter, create a written partnership agreement so that when you do have human job kind of turnover, that your program will stay consistent. So bringing the human and animal together, that can mean a lot of things. But in terms of collaboration, it really just means look at all the different people in your community that are helping animals, helping humans, and put them all together at the table and really figure out what your goals are and how you can help each other. And so at the end of the day, instead of just looking at it from those three bubbles of the human service organizations, the veterinarians, and the animal welfare people, I really want you and challenge you to think of your collaborative pool as all of these people. So I know you're going to get these slides at the end so you can really look at them. And obviously, if you have any questions, you'll have our contact information. But definitely remember, your collaborative is so much bigger than you might even imagine. Oops, and I clicked away again. Sorry, guys. So during our Don't Forget the Pets training, we really look at what are the barriers to service and having animal programs in shelter that we're hearing from our partners. And so, these, after we've surveyed all the people that we've worked with and trained with, these are kind of the top 7 right now. So number 1, funding. How will you fund it to start it? How will you fund your program going on? Space, do you have space at your shelter to house animals? Is that space big enough? Work with your animal welfare partners. They can tell you how to effectively house animals. As far as allergies goes, that's a huge concern in the US. I'm sure it must be in Europe as well. When you have people in shelter that are allergic to cats, allergic to dogs, it's obviously a really huge concern. We'll talk about it in a little bit about how to kind of overcome that barrier. It's not as challenging as you might think, even though it's the top 3 in the top 3 of our biggest concerns. Number 4, liability and insurance. I'm sure that has to be the same there, although I know all of you Europeans are chuckling right now. My sister lives in France, and she is always making fun of us for how litigious Americans are. And so maybe you don't have the huge concerns that we do. We have entirely too many lawyers here in the US. That is my only defense, but we can certainly help walk you through what some of our concerns are to keep pets and people safe. As far as some people are concerned, whoa, did not mean to do that. Sorry, people. As far as the fear of pets, this is a big one for us. We talk about trauma-informed care in the United States. And if you're dealing with, survivors of domestic violence, there's going to be a lot of trauma. And some of that can be exacerbated, made worse if they're afraid of pets and you're bringing pets into the space that they need to live in. So when we talk about fear of pets, that is definitely something we worry about quite a bit, and it's pretty easy to overcome. A lot of it is process and protocol, which we really won't get to today, but definitely something to keep in mind for your programs. Other complaints that we have heard are the cleanliness and who is going to care for the animals, who's going to pick up their waste, who's going to be responsible for making sure that, they're well cared for. And so definitely another part of having your processes and your protocols set up ahead of time so that you can kind of manage the expectations of your staff, of the people bringing in pets into shelter, and the people who just have to live with them, but maybe aren't pet owners. So to keep everybody kind of happy and, as we say, on the same page, you definitely want to do that through your processes and your protocols. Safety and animal bites. I kind of look at that as tying back into, the liability and insurance, but it's definitely a concern. We personally have not heard from our shelter partners that has happened. I'm sure it does, but it is actually a much less frequent occurrence than you might think. Oh my goodness, what have I done? There we go. Okay, so normally during our training, we spend a great deal of time talking about designing your spaces. I know we only have about, 13 minutes left, and I definitely don't want to gobble that all up with designing space. So I'm going to cruise through this section pretty quickly, not talking quickly, flipping through slides quickly. So,
Bryn,
yeah.
Good news, you have about 45 minutes. So I did math wrong. Shocker.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you don't have to be subjected to my New York speed talking. Bless
Perfect.
it. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you. So when we talk about designing spaces, this tends to be the thing that this is never going to translate well, I apologize, but we call it catastrophizing. It's not even a word in English, we just say it. But basically, people tend to come to us and say, we don't have space for animals. We're in the city, we're in a major metropolitan area. There's no room on our property. There's no room in our shelter. And that is it's a challenge we gladly and happily, accept. If that was actually the case, and people in big cities and in very tight communities, couldn't find room for pets, then nobody in cities would have pets. And so when you start looking at your shelters, stop thinking of it from maybe an animal sheltering point of view. You're not walking into an actual animal shelter. You're not walking into an animal boarding facility. This is just housing people and their pets. So think of it through that viewpoint, and it'll start being a little bit easier for you to imagine how you can have pets in your small spaces.
Hey, Bryn, I know you're going to talk about this, and so I don't know that you need to answer it now, but I think a good thing to keep in mind when you do come to it, allergies. So one of the questions in the chat was, some studies advocate that children who grow up in homes with domestic animals develop less allergy pathologies. So any comment from you, maybe when you get to that allergy piece, because I know you usually talk about it within the context of design.
I do. And just so you know, before I was a construction worker, I'm going to apologize. I was actually a science professor. I taught at a college and taught science. So I do tend to get very, very interested in the science of allergies and in biology in general. So yes, we will definitely answer that question. And you are 100% right. Whoever asked that question, that research is pretty much, as we would say, irrefutable at this point. So,
thanks, Brent.
Absolutely. So if you go to our Don't Forget the Pets website and you look at our training handbook that we offer, we kind of break everything up into these 5, what we call pet plans. So they're just different methods of housing pets of people in crisis, either pets of domestic violence survivors or people experiencing homelessness in general. So when we say co-sheltering with pet in an individual room, that is exactly what it sounds like. You are just allowing a survivor or a person experiencing homelessness to keep their pet right there with them where they sleep and where they spend their time. So to distinguish that from number 2, which is communal housing, here in the United States, some of our very, very large homeless shelter providers, I don't even know how to describe it other than kind of like a gigantic army barrack. So it's just a very large open room with bunk beds. So very, very tight spaces and lots of people staying in the same space. So definitely very different strategies. And hopefully you guys don't house people that way in Europe. It's really demoralizing here in the US that we do that. So Pet Plan 3 is kind of back to our in-shelter model. And so instead of letting the pets stay in the room where the human sleeps, now you're still having pets at your shelter, but they're staying in their own space. So you're not really creating a new space, but you're maybe turning, we have a lot of garages, we have a lot of big storage rooms in our shelters for, various things that I don't think need to be inside. So we will talk about that as well. Pet plan number 4 is, if you have space on your property, you can just build out a new space where animals will be housed on your property. Pet plan 5 is more when you are working with an animal welfare provider, so an animal shelter or a rescue organization. Lots of them in the United States have what we just call temporary care programs. So for a short period of time, they will just house your animal kind of like a boarding facility, but they don't charge. So the animal shelter temporary care programs, they clearly already know how to house animals, but we like to give them some tips on what to do to protect the safety and confidentiality of those pets. Okay, so common design elements. So regardless of which pet plan you utilize, they will all have these kind of same design elements or problems, barriers, however you want to look at them. And so when we say intake, what we mean by that is that initial time when a survivor comes into shelter. So they're filling out all of your paperwork. Well, what are you doing with the pet during this intake process? Design element 2, quarantine. In the United States, because we are very litigious, we worry very much about exposing other clients and residents of the domestic violence shelter to some zoonotic disease or some other disease that your pet might come into shelter with. And so we talk about quarantine times. It sounds so much more drastic than it is. Katie always thinks of zombie apocalypse when she hears the word quarantine. So we laugh. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't need to be some separate facility for Ebola outbreaks. This is not that kind of a thing. This is, let's just make sure that your dogs and your cats have the proper vaccination. And when they do come in, as Katie mentioned, part of that power and control, when it involves pets, lots of times the abuser has withheld care, veterinary care for that pet. And so the survivor might not have had the opportunity to get that animal the vaccines that you require for your area. And so this is just a time when that pet is kept away from other pets in your shelter, when it's kept away from other people in your shelter. It might be just confined to the room. It might be confined to a crate. What we do with that is let's make sure the pet is not maybe going to the bathroom in the same area or being walked in the same area as the other pets until it's had a vaccine and also given that vaccine time to take effect. For most of our US vaccines, depending on which one, it's anywhere from 10 to 14 days. So these are not very big barriers, but it's definitely something to think about when you think about your processes and your protocols. Traffic flow. So basically, how are your pets getting to go where they need to go to the bathroom? How are they getting back to where they live when they're at the shelter? And so we'll kind of take a look at that, because that really touches on a lot of barriers. It touches on that keeping adults and kids safe from bites, keeping pets safe from each other. Not all cats like other cats, not all dogs like other dogs. It also touches on that trauma-informed care of if you have people or staff that are afraid of animals, that you're not constantly walking them by each other and inducing more trauma. It also helps with the allergies. So we'll talk a bit about allergies in a second. So I'm going to hold that thought for 1 second. Enrichment, just a weird word that we use to describe anything that is going to enrich a pet's mind. And so that can be designing your spaces to be reducing stress for cats and dogs. It can be providing toys and activities that are going to keep their minds engaged and keep them from, just really becoming a little bit what we call kennel crazy from being confined to a room or confined to a cage. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The human-animal bond we'll talk about more in depth. Doggy daycare, we definitely will talk about. In storage, we will. So let's hold those thoughts for a sec. So first design element, when you think about planning for intake, that's also a cross point with planning for quarantine, because a lot of the same strategies can be utilized. But basically, crates are your best friend. I don't know if you call them the same thing in Europe, but when we say a crate, we basically mean one of these wire crates. They're collapsible. They are easy to store. They're easy to move into a survivor's room. They're easy to move around your shelter in general. We would strongly recommend that you have one for every pet parent. And they're also great for intake. So depending on how the organization, really goes through that intake process with their clients, we frequently do that through an advocate or through a counselor here in the US. And so you bring your clients into an office, your counselors will walk them through all the paperwork and all the things that go into getting a person into your shelters. So great place to put a crate, because that survivor may come in with nothing, related to their, pet's care. So this is a great place to bring the pet in, put them in a safe place in that office while you're filling out all the paperwork. I left that in here, Katie. There is 0% chance that this translates. In the United States, we frequently use furniture styled crates. So this silly little thing up here, we call a doggy credenza. It's just a fancy word for fancy dog crate. But they do look nicer. So if your shelter tends to be, a little bit nicer looking than, some of the other shelters that we tend to see, you might not want a wire crate sitting in a hallway. You might not want a wire crate in your advocate's office. So you can get a fancier version if you want. If you have room outside, these outdoor kennels are super inexpensive in the United States. I can't imagine that they are any more expensive in Europe. They clip together with just kind of kennel latches that are super easy for anyone to put together. We buy them on Amazon here in the US. I know you guys probably have access to the same things there. So they're just a great tool to use, because you can use them during intake. You can also use them if you're having a dog that is maybe struggling with what we call separation anxiety, when their pet parent leaves, has to go to appointments, has to go to work, and the dog has a lot to say in the room when you've left them behind. It might be more enriching, might be a happier dog if you could put them outside in a kennel like this, rather than leaving them locked in the room when their pet parent has to go out. So great tool, pretty inexpensive all the way around for these options. Okay, so as part of looking at shelters and talking to our shelter partners and evaluating what space they have and what space they should be using for pets, there's a lot of different things to think about. One of the questions we get asked a lot is, okay, we are a 10-room or a 10-bed domestic violence shelter. How many rooms should we set aside to be pet friendly? And so when you think about that, I kind of look at that twofold. In the United States, we generally recommend 10% to 25% of your pet parents coming into shelter will need an accommodation for their pet. So you can use that number. What we more strongly advocate for, though, is making all of your rooms pet friendly. The construction methods that you would use to make your construction more durable for pets are also great for long-term sheltering. Kids tend to be very hard on construction as well. So anything that you would do to make a room pet friendly would also be very child friendly. And so just something to consider. When we're asked about, if we make all rooms pet friendly, what do we do for those severe allergy sufferers? So maybe what you should do then is make all of your rooms pet friendly just for that construction purpose, but then say, okay, let's set aside this one room or these 2 rooms for the severe allergy sufferers, and they'll stay there. So something to consider. Let me blow this up a little bit and show you some of the more specifics. So this was a small shelter. that we were working with here in the United States, and they had already purchased this building, and I believe it was a doctor's office or a dentist's office. So it already had all these little rooms subdivided, and they were trying to figure out, okay, how do we most effectively make this small space pet friendly? And so one of the things they did was set it up like this, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it's not my favorite. So I'm going to use them as a what not to do instead of what to do. How's that? So one of the things when you think of flow of traffic is what makes dogs bark, and dogs are very friendly. They're very social. When people are walking by, they're going to want to say, hey, how are you? Can you take me out? I want to go play. Dogs will have a lot to say if people are going to be walking back and forth in front of their room all the time. And so making your pet friendly bedrooms right across the hallway from the kitchen, which is going to be one of your busiest areas, and your living room, which is going to be your other busiest area, is probably not the best idea. Now, in their defense, one of the things they did do was they wanted to give the dogs their own entry and exit. And so the dogs would be coming out and they would be going back here to use the bathroom, so to speak. So that was great because the humans are coming in through this front entrance. So that's good. But the pets are also still having to walk by these primary spaces to get to their bathroom. So when you think about that and you think about the trauma-informed care of people who are nervous about pets, and you think about the kiddos, one of the things we say with children and pets are that they are a magnetic force. If you have a child and a dog in the same area, they are so naturally drawn to each other most of the time that it is very challenging to keep them apart. And so don't put your pet spaces right across from where your kids are going to be hanging out, because they're going to want to be together. So push your pet rooms to the end of your buildings if you can. Put them near an entrance or an exit. Great way to control the flow of traffic. Also great for your allergy sufferers, because now your allergy sufferers aren't going to be walking by these pet rooms to get to the kitchen. So definitely something to think of. One of the other things that we like to do, if you have the space, is if this is a pet-friendly bedroom, if you can put a dog door into the wall and create an individual, what we call pet relief area, a place for each pet to go to the bathroom, that is ideal. That way, when the survivor has to go to work, go to a meeting, be away from their pet, that pet can come and go, as we say, at their own leisure. So that is going to really help with that barking. It's going to help with having accidents, messes in the bedrooms. It's just going to be really beneficial for you in the long run. Okay, so we have the bedrooms, we have our living rooms. I think we're ready to move on to keeping kids safe more in depth. So like I said, kids and animals, they're really challenging to keep apart. And so if you're creating a space for pets to go to the bathroom and a place for pets to play, definitely think about little fingers, as we say. So whether you're making your fencing out of chain link, as we call this, you definitely are going to want to put some sort of barrier around it. We have a product in the United States that we just call security fencing. It's just a privacy slat, if you will. It's a piece of plastic that slides into the chain link fence. That's great. Doesn't look that great. And so this product is one we use more frequently. It's just bamboo. Bamboo is very, very durable. We build with it in South and Central America all the time. It's great for all weather conditions, and it just ties to your actual fencing. So a great durable product that looks a lot better than the plastic slide ins. Also would like to point out, This was a project that we did in a very, very small shelter. This was a 7-room shelter. They had a very small backyard that the kids needed room to play in, and the dogs needed room to get some exercise and go to the bathroom. And so just wanted to show you that these spaces don't need to be terribly large. It's just a dog being able to get outside and see the sunshine and smell all the smells, as we say, is going to just be in a better mental place, which is going to make them way better behaved in your shelter. So remember that enrichment and that exercise piece it's very important. I don't know if many of your shelters in Europe allow like pets to be walked on a leash near the shelter. Some of ours in the US do, and some don't, as mainly a security concern. So something to think of. If pets can be walked on leash, great. If they can't because of security, then it's definitely better to provide some sort of a play space for them. The other thing here on this one is, it depends where you are in Europe, obviously, whether your houses and your shelters have basements. Here in the United States, it goes, both ways. Some of our places do, and some of our places don't. But they're a great place to have doggy daycare spaces. So a kennel that a dog can go to when their pet parent is not in shelter. So just keep that in mind. If you have them, it is a great space for them to hang out in during the day when their pet parent is gone. Okay, allergies. So now we are there. So to answer the question that was asked before, absolutely, there is amazing, great research that has shown that you are way better off being exposed to more allergens in your youth than if you try to, we say live in a bubble and protect yourself from everything. So allergy sufferers, which Katie and I are both extreme allergy sufferers, so we absolutely understand the importance of, maintaining your health. But it is really easy to overcome. It's really just an education piece. Allergens, the things that cause allergies, it's not magic. It's not some little crazy thing that we can't understand. It is basically very similar to dust when you think of environmental allergies, whether that's environmental from trees, flowers, pollen, or whether that's environment from cats, dogs, and other pets. So when you think about the easiest thing you can do to help with allergies, cleaning is for sure your best tool. So if you can get those allergens out of a space, that's going to really help. Another really good kind of fact and just thing to know, to talk to your staff, to talk to other pet owners, to talk to allergy sufferers about, is the research angle of people who have allergies are just as likely to have an extreme allergic reaction to a pet being near them in a co-housing space, like a domestic violence shelter, as they are sitting in a classroom next to a child who is a pet owner. So if you have 2 kids sitting next to each other in a classroom and there is, pet dander, we say, so that allergen on their clothing, then that child who is the allergy sufferer is going to have a reaction to that kid who has the dander and the allergens on their clothing. And so when you think of people who come in to your shelter and they say, oh, I can't, I have allergies, that honestly, I'm not trying to be dismissive. This is something that they will have to deal with their whole life in every setting that they put themselves in, whether that is a workplace, a grocery store, a classroom, whatever. They need to take precautions to keep themselves healthy, whether that's washing their hands more often, not touching their eyes after they touch things. So having that education piece involved is huge and part of your cleaning protocols. Now, when you think about cleaning, we certainly should do everything in our power to make it easier to clean. And so the things we recommend are absolutely get rid of carpeting. Carpeting for us allergy sufferers is, as we say, the kiss of death. So it is, carpeting is a big no-no. So get rid of that. You can put tile in, you can leave concrete or stone. But what we really love is this product in the middle. And I did look this up, Katie, they have it in Europe as well. So this is luxury vinyl plank. It is a click together, completely waterproof product that is basically vinyl. And what that gives you is that protection from both pet accidents, say they go to the bathroom on the floor, or the child who spills their drink. So again, this is just a great product for you to have in all of your rooms, whether they're all going to be pet friendly or not. It is just a really inexpensive way of getting your floors to be super easy to clean and waterproof. The other really nice thing about it is that depending on what you put underneath it, it's also a really good sound barrier. So when you think about tile, whether that is ceramic or porcelain, it tends to be really loud and very echoey. It makes more noise. So definitely my recommendation, no tile, certainly no hardwood, certainly no carpeting, put in a product like that. When you have severe allergy sufferers, one of the other really cool things you can do is buy these portable filtration systems, put them in each of your rooms. They're great for all sorts of health concerns. They help remove pollutants from the air, dust from the air, germs from the air. We can purchase them here in the US on Amazon. I swear, Katie, Amazon should be paying us for all the times we recommend them. I apologize. Certainly there are better ways to acquire these products, but Amazon is the great equalizer, I guess. They're very inexpensive here in the US. I would assume that the same is true there. Also great for staff offices. If you have staff that are allergic to animals, think about putting one of these in their rooms. If you have staff, or if you are really concerned about allergies, I know you have these. These are super common in Europe. These are like individual little heating and cooling units. And so we call them split air systems. I do not know what you call them there other than small cool heaters and coolers. So they're really great. They are ductless. Ducting for us allergy sufferers tends to be a huge place where allergens sit. And so this is a really great way for all allergies, not just pet, to help protect your people. So very inexpensive. You can put them in each room, kind of helps with energy costs as well. Good product all around. Our last kind of trick or tip for allergy reduction would be not to put your cute little dog in the washer and dryer, but to have separate laundry for your pet owners and your non-pet owners. Again, it's all about the allergens. So if you can have a separate way of cleaning clothes and bedding of pet parents versus non-pet parents, that's really going to help with your allergies. Okay, Katie, did I forget anything?
No, I don't think so. And you've got about 13 minutes.
Awesome. I think we're good. All right. Enrichment we've already talked about. The one thing I did want to touch on that we usually go way more in depth on is this designing for post-traumatic stress. So we always think about post-traumatic stress in our humans. You know, we think about, you know, all the different ways that can manifest itself in a human, but the same can be true of our pets. So a pet that has been exposed to domestic violence, violence in general, can really cause some behavioral issues that we might tend to think of as just a bad dog or an untrained pet. But please be mindful, this is an excellent thing to work with your animal welfare partners on and your veterinary partners on, is understanding that when a pet might be acting in a way that is not pleasing to us, whether it's not using the litter box or going to the bathroom in the room or barking too much or a cat hiding under a bed, think about that this might be their way of telling you that they're in trauma too, and they need to be soothed, not trained, as the case may be. So think of just toys, places for cats to perch. They love to look out windows, playing soothing music for them, and just in general, thinking about, getting them exercise and that enrichment that they need to be mentally and physically healthy. Okay, the human-animal bond. So many things we could say about it. I could talk for at least 2 more hours on that. But at the end of the day, the big important thing is, where are we allowing our pet parents to really have that time to bond and heal with their pets? So especially if the pet is not staying in the room with their pet parent, but they're living in a kennel or a cage somewhere else, you definitely need to have that time where the dog or the cat can get out of the cage and you can hang out with your pet and cuddle them. These places don't need to be big. This is a very tiny closet that I converted into a cat room. These are the cat cages, and this is like storage under these benches. And it's just a really cool way for a pet parent to hang out and snuggle their kitty. We did this in a basement. This is the creepy basement. We just turned it into a cool living room where a person could sit and watch a TV show or a movie with their pet and just spend that quality healing time. Don't need to be big. They just need to be there. Okay, storage. I mean, it goes without saying, when you start a pet program, people are going to be so excited that you're offering services to pets and people that they're going to want to give you products. Be ready for that and be ready to store it. Okay, so I just want to show you really quickly some examples, again, to kind of show you that these things don't need to be complicated. When you think about housing pets in room with their pet parent, it really is just a matter of getting rid of the old floors that are going to sit all the dirt and the allergens, and just creating spaces where cats can get up off the ground to help them with their mental, their sanity. If you can put in a dog door, I love putting holes in walls. So it's one of my favorite things to do, and it's really inexpensive. If you have the space, I strongly advocate for creating these dog doors in these individual pet relief areas. So these spaces don't need to be very expensive. Really, the flooring is the thing we see the most often that needs to be changed and fixed. And really, if you think about it, what you can do is build it into your long-term budget of, you would have had to do something with that flooring eventually. Flooring isn't forever. And so just think of it as, do each room as you can afford it and build them to the best durable materials that you can. You'll be able to look through these pros and cons later. The biggies are just kind of the things we've talked about. If the dog is in a individual bedroom, be mindful that they might have that separation anxiety, as we say, that they're going to be nervous when their pet parent leaves and they're in an unfamiliar space. So plan for that and just know that it is a thing. Communal living, we're going to skip for now. These are just some cool ways you can do that huge open floor plan with pets. If any of you have questions about it later, feel free to ask. Pet Plan 3. So this is where you take an existing space and you convert it into something where pets can live. I love going into shelters and finding the huge, we call them the junk room or the storage closet, where they have their, their Christmas decorations, their paper towels, their toilet paper. That stuff does not need to be stored in air-conditioned and heated space. So feel free to put a secondary storage, like a shed or something, on your property, and let's use this space for the pets. This is that same room. We turned it into a cat room. It did have cages as well. That is something you want to think about with cats. You can't just throw them into a room together, especially if they are not spayed or neutered. But also, they are cats. They need to acclimate to each other. Okay, so always plan to have some sort of caging kind of introductory space for them. It does not need to be this fancy. I'll show you a different kind in a minute. Garages, we tend to have tons of garages in the United States. That is not as common in Europe, but when you do, they are a great place to put dogs. So that is that garage converted into, these are actually indoor and outdoor kennels. They go through a door and they have their individual pet relief spaces. And then back through this room, we created that space for the human animal bond, that, as we say, the hangout space. Okay. The only kind of con that the downside I want to point out on this method is when you think about, you've taken the pet out of the pet parent's bedroom space and now put them in a cage or a kennel somewhere else. We say out of sight, out of mind. The easiest way to think of that is you have a parent who has been in crisis for a number of years, months, whatever. And when they come into shelter, there is very often a feeling of ease that comes over them. They're very frequently very tired. Depression can play a role. Either way, them, having to like go somewhere else to care for their pet is not great. It's not great for their healing. It's not great for their, their energy level at that time. And so when we say out of sight, out of mind, it really just means if the pet isn't right there with them, they may deprioritize the pet's well-being. So you will want to have a member of your staff checking on those pets and making sure they're being cared for properly. Pet Plan 4. So basically this is, you're creating a new space on your shelter. There's a lot of inexpensive ways to do that. You can do it by converting what we call prefabricated, it's already made shed. This is 2 sheds that we did for one of our domestic violence partners. You can also do these little prefabricated metal buildings. They tend to be a bit more expensive than the wooden buildings. You can also just build an addition. That tends to be one of the more inexpensive ways to create a brand new space. Or you can build out of something other than one of these prefabricated methods. This is one we're doing right now at a shelter, and it's block. These blocks, kind of like you're seeing here, it's a very inexpensive building material. Even in Europe, that's probably one of the more economical ways to go. And it's really durable. So it will last forever. So think of those. And then once we have, that individual space, the things you want to think about are, heating and cooling. I know you guys are not the fiends, as we say, for air conditioning that we are. We tend to over air condition everything in the United States, but just know that these smaller spaces, they tend to get very hot. And so you really do need to have a cooling method for them. Otherwise the dogs will get heat exhaustion, so will the cats. So definitely don't skimp on the heating and cooling. And then what we do is we also put, this is actually divided into 4 spaces that you'll see in a sec, but they each have their own pet relief area with a visual barrier in between them. So they're not, barking at each other all day and running at each other all day. Just a good way to keep them safe. And then we also created a little play space for them. So you have basically everything you need in a very confined space. I left this with the exterior showing so that you can see it was right in a metro area. So they didn't have a ton of space, but they had enough to create this. So that was that play yard. This is the front of the 2 sheds that are kind of smushed together. 4 individual areas. We have a lot of rules about having access for people with disabilities. So this one is accessible for people in a wheelchair. And then this is what each of the spaces looks like inside. It's basically set up to function like a living room. It has that waterproof flooring. It actually has a waterproof wall covering. It has the door to go out to the pet relief area. It has, whoa, hey, that was fun. It has individual heating and cooling. It has items for kitties. So there's your cat perch to get them off the ground so they feel safer. It has toys for cats, litter box for cats, dog bed. So if you have a family that has a dog and a cat, this is a perfect way to co-house them together. Also, it makes them feel more secure. They're happier being in something that looks like a living room as opposed to being in a cage. And so it's a nice way for the human to come in. They can sit on the couch. There's a TV so they can watch a movie or a TV show with them. It's just kind of an all-in-one space. They're tiny. These are only, we do them as small as 8 by 10. They don't need to be big. Other things you can do with the kind of drop buildings, the prefabricated buildings, is have kind of a dog building and a cat building, if you wish. Some shelters really don't want that living room pet retreat style. They want cages. And so this is the cat space. There are those more inexpensive cages for getting the cats, acclimated to each other. Plus you can hold them in there and let them kind of just really get used to co-living. Good place to hold them until they can get spayed or neutered. Just kind of an open space for them to hang out, with a space for the pet parent to have that human animal bond time. Same for the dogs. These are indoor-outdoor kennels, so they can go out into a pet relief area, and then their pet parent can spend some time snuggling them here. Basically, the ups and downs, the good and the bad of this is very similar to, when you take the pet away from the pet parent in Pet Plan 3. So, it's a really easy way to create exactly the space you want. It is, it gets them out of your hallways maybe and out into a safer space, so that flow of traffic is easier to navigate. Just be mindful of, like I said, that out of sight, out of mind. And remember the noise, the noise with this method and the last method of housing. Separation anxiety is a big part of dog, trauma. We have it with our own pets. I go to work and my dogs have a lot to say about that. I have currently a rug eating dog who tells me they're unhappy by eating all of my rugs. It's great. So Pet Plan 5, I know that you may end up partnering or collaborating with an animal shelter. So we have tons of information for them as well. The big thing to talk about with your animal welfare partners is the safety and concerns surrounding domestic violence. So you don't want to have a victim come into the lobby of an animal shelter. You don't know who is there, the abuser could be there looking for their pet. So definitely want to create separation, whether that is a separate entrance for survivors to come in with their pets, or whether you only have them come in when the shelter is not open to the public. So definitely something to think about.
Bren,
Yep. Are we done?
Sorry. Yeah, so sorry, Bren. I was just going to say, since you were on this slide, a big part of our discussion here in the US is that pets aren't just dogs and cats, and our folks really need to think about, chickens and goats and cows and birds and snakes and all different species of animals. And so, this collaboration piece with animal welfare organizations and this Pet Plan number 5 can really come in handy with this stuff. So sorry, Bren, I just wanted to point that out.
Oh, no, you're good. Glad you mentioned it. Yeah, especially, in Europe, I know you guys are big fans of the pet bunnies in certain areas. So they tend to get really stressed out, especially when there's a lot of noise. And so having them stay at a rescue or an animal shelter might be less stressful than being in a small communal living situation, for sure. Thank you. Okay. This slide is much more geared towards shelters in the United States, but definitely talk to your local government agencies about rules that you might have about housing pets. I don't know what yours are in your individual countries, but definitely before you start planning too far ahead, you want to reach out to them and see what your rules are. you know, we're not going to have time to talk about operations, but I wanted to throw this slide in there because we definitely have some really good sample documents on our Don't Forget the Pets website that'll talk about how to like really set up your structure to keep yourselves safe and keep your clients safe and your pets safe. So go check out our website for sure. We already mentioned that animals are not a burden on your fund, on your budgets, so to speak, but they can be a great fundraising tool. The cute fuzzy face is a really good way to fundraise. And Katie, you'll appreciate this. So we're not the only crazy people in the world. So we spend a lot of money in the US on pet services and pet products. And we're not alone. They spend a lot over there as well. So you have a huge population of people that love to spend money on pets and pet related things. So they're out there. You just got to find them and get them involved and give them that light bulb moment, as Katie says. Okay, and there is our contact information that you will get with the slides. Sorry, we went a few minutes over, but if you have time, we're here for questions.
Muito obrigada. Estou a tentar ligar-me.